Hey there, welcome to the MLB DFS build. I'm Kevin Roberts, ready to go over this MLB DraftKings main slate for Wednesday, September 4th. Already pushed out a Thursday Night Football kickoff game video for the NFL DFS game, first game of the year, so go check that out if you haven't already. If I help you out in any way today, please give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel. You'll get alerted to more videos just like this. Our goal is to help you win, and obviously it's fun to do, and it's nice for me to be able to go through and walk through my own process because it helps me out too. But hopefully we can get a big win today. Nice slate for baseball. Let's get going on the main slate. First game up, we have the Mets hosting the Red Sox. This park factor is not great, and the pitching is decent. So I'm not super interested in this game. Certainly not looking to pick on Tanner Houck on the other side. So I think the Mets are a very low upside contrarian stack. Obviously in MLB, baseball going to baseball. You can do whatever you want. The Mets just are not going to be on my radar because Tanner Houck is not a guy I want to go after. On the other side, Tyler McGill is capable of being good. But this is probably one spot where we can pick on a pitcher if we want to. He's been not great against lefties the last 2 years, 12% walk rate so far this year against lefties, 10% last year. 170 ISO given up this year to lefties. So obviously the Red Sox look like an okay stack. I don't love the park. And, McGill isn't, a gas can by any means. But, I started off with Duran, Devers, Tristan Casas. So I think Boston is a decent stack. They definitely grade out nice with a 216 collective ISO. They do strike out a little bit. So McGill does offer a little bit of value at a 7.3, I think, price tag, 7.2. He's okay at home, 14 fantasy points per game, coming off a nice 21.8 fantasy point outing. So you can kind of play both sides of this if you want to, just because the park factor favors the pitching. But I have a little bit of interest in Boston. I think anytime they go away from Fenway and the situation is, something we want to think about, it's interesting because they're not going to be very owned. All right, next up, we have the Rockies visiting the Braves. Bradley Blaylock. Let's make sure that's not an opener. Let's see. He's been pitching enough to not be an opener. He's not been very good, though. Negative 3.6 fantasy points in his last game, 1.7 in his season debut back in June. He's had one good game. I think this is definitely a guy we can go after with the Braves. 155 ISO on the left side. Not a high K rate. And the walk rate isn't great. So yeah, I think starting on the left side with the Braves and the whole full stack looks plenty fine. Don't really have any interest in him. The Braves look pretty good though. On the other side, don't want the Rockies against Charlie Morton. Morton is not the guy he once was. And let's see what his price is. 8.2, pretty good price at home against the Rockies. I like Morton quite a bit. Obviously, he's gonna be favored to win here. He's only averaging 14 fantasy points per game on the year. He has over a 4.0 ERA. But, the Rockies do strike out 27% of the time. They do have some power, but it's away from Coors. So I definitely like Morton a lot at the 8.2 price case. So out of this game, it's kind of Morton or bust for me. But the Braves are totally fine. Right there in that kind of mid-tier range with Boston. If you get to the Braves or the Red Sox, there's nothing wrong with that. All right, next up, you got the Guardians taking on the Royals in KC. Ben Lively going up against the Royals. Ben Lively giving up a 215 ISO to the left side and not doing anything really scary as far as strikeouts go. KC doesn't really strike out, and they have a 177 collective ISO, so you can absolutely fire up the Royals if you would like. They don't really stand out for me on this slate necessarily, but there's nothing wrong with him. Last time Lively faced him, he had 14 fantasy points, 14 fantasy points, and kind of held him in check. But I would definitely lean Royals over Lively for sure. On the other side, Seth Lugo continues his pretty darn good 2024 season. His ERA jumped up a little bit, but he bounced back with a pretty good game in his last outing with 27.6 fantasy points. 27.6 fantasy points. That's 2 out of his last 3 that he had over 27 fantasy points. He got smashed by the Phillies in a game sandwiched in between those games where he gave up 11 hits and 5 runs. Not really interested in Lugo just because the Guardians do not strike out that much, only a 20% clip, and they do have some power. But not really looking to pick on Lugo either unless he's crazy owned. I'm going to actually pull up the ownership real quick just to have an idea. Bear with me as I do that. It's taking a second. Honestly, there's nothing about his numbers that look that amazing as far as like prioritizing him. His 8.7K price feels a little bit steep given the matchup, and nothing here really is really exciting. Okay, this is taking forever to load. Let's see. I should have had this ready beforehand. My apologies. All right. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Let's move along as that loads, taking forever. We got a really good pitchers duel going on in Cubs. In the Cubs-Pirates game at Wrigley Field, the wind is blowing in, so I'm not really that interested in the offenses. I guess the main incentive would be that it's probably not going to be very owned. It is Wrigley, so if the wind just kind of shifts a little bit, it could be fun. But with the wind blowing in, I am favoring the pitching. Don't really want to pick on the Cubs here with Domingo German, but he's in play. He's not expensive. He's 7.5K. So you could do it if you really wanted to. Not really feeling that. I'm probably going to stay away from the Cubs, though. On the other side, we have Shota Imanaga, and he is definitely one of the best pitchers on the slate. He comes in at a pretty hefty 9.5K, but to me, he's probably the second best pitcher on the board. The Pirates do strike out 25% of the time, don't have a very imposing ISO at 134, and obviously the park, when the wind's blowing in, is not very advantageous for hitting. So Shota looks awesome. He's one of my favorite pitchers, and I'll definitely be getting a lot of him. Don't really have any interest in the bats across the board here. Just for a quick ownership check, Charlie Morton, I mentioned before, really like him. 30% owned. 37, almost 38% owned right now, his projected ownership. So that's really chalky. Because of the ownership, you absolutely can consider going underweight. He has not been an elite arm at all this year. He's been just fine. Definitely has had some bad games. If the ownership sticks there, I'll be very interested in the Rockies. I do not like them away from Coors. They do strike out a lot, and Morton is certainly capable of dominating them. But the ownership is scary. I like Morton, but I'm probably going to play both sides of that if that ownership sticks. Zach Gallen is the second highest owned pitcher. Not really into that. And Shota comes in as the third highest owned. I'm okay with that. Don't really care, especially if, I might just get off of Morton completely and maybe not necessarily stack the Rockies, but just go use other pitchers. And Imanaga is probably a pretty good way to start that off. As far as who was I talking about just a second ago, Lugo's not garnering any ownership, so there's no real leverage play there. So I would just kind of ignore it. I'm not really interested in playing him. All right, here we go. We got the Brewers hosting the Cardinals, obviously a fairly big series, specifically for St. Louis. Sonny Gray takes on the Brewers, 23% K rate. It's obviously a park downgrade for pitching for him. He's the most expensive pitcher on the board at 9.7K. He also averages the most fantasy points per game of all pitchers on the board. And he, in 2 meetings with the Brewers, he's had 18 fantasy points per game. So I think he's probably fine. He'll probably get by here. But there's no real leverage here just because he's not going to be crazy owned. He's coming at 18% ownership. I'd expect that to drop a little bit just because there's other guys on here like Birdsong is a really nice punt at 6K. And you have some other guys that their ownership could creep up a little bit. So I think Sonny's fine, but at his price point, I would absolutely rather pivot to Imanaga. And there's another guy on the board that I would prefer a lot over him. I think you can play him, but it's not the best park, and the Brewers do have a pretty capable offense. So I'm probably going to be extremely underweight or fully fading Sonny Gray. On the other side, Colin Rea is taking on the Cards. Cards get a park upgrade, and he can be gotten to. So I have no problems with Cardinals stacks. They just aren't a very fun offense to play. It's kind of more like I don't really want to play the pitcher against them because they only have a 20% K rate. Don't have a lot of ISO power to begin with. So, you can play them. It's a park upgrade. It's a divisional game, huge game for the Cardinals. But I'm not really that interested. Yankees take on the Rangers. Marcus Stroman taking on Texas. His ground ball tendencies kind of get me off the Texas bats. Obviously, the Rangers have been really inconsistent all year. They are at full strength, though, and they do have a little bit of power, and they don't strike out that much. So I'm definitely not interested in playing Stroman here, especially I don't think he's that expensive, actually. Well, he's really cheap at 6.6K, actually. A little surprised at the price. I think due to the price, Stroman is a fine SP2. It's not a good matchup. There's no upside. He's a ground ball pitcher. Texas is a bit of a dangerous offense. But I'll have a sprinkling just because, he's too cheap. He's really cheap. Decent chance he lasts 5 innings and gets the win. If he can get 4 to 5 strikeouts, I think we have a really good SP2 there. It's not super safe and there's no real ceiling, so it's not something I want to do a lot of, but certainly in play. On the other side, we have Nathan Eovaldi taking on the Yankees. That sucks for him. He's not cheap. He's 9.3K. So no, at home against the Yankees, who have a 217 ISO against righties and only a 21% whiff rate. Not really feeling that. The question would be if he's going to be owned, if we can leverage that with a somewhat under-owned Yankees stack. And right now, that doesn't appear to be the case. It just seems like a stay away spot. Yankees get a park downgrade, and Valdi's a good pitcher. So there's no leverage either. The Yankees aren't going to be really high owned. There's no leverage to play a 9.3K Eovaldi. I would just stick with logic here, and Imanaga, even Sonny Gray are way better spends. Yeah. So this game is probably a full fade for me. Best game of the night, Dodgers at Angels. Bobby Miller has been really bad all year. He is cheap at 7.3K, and he has bounced back with 21 and 11 fantasy points in his last 2 games. But boy, oh boy, this guy's been really bad on the road. Negative 1.7 fantasy points per game, 11.12 ERA in 6 road games. He's been really good at home. So next time he's at home, let's consider him again as long as the matchup is okay. To be fair, the Angels aren't good. They have a 26% K rate against righties. Really weak ISO at 133. They do have some power with Taylor Ward up top. They have some power hitters, but they also strike out a good deal. I don't really want to play Bobby Miller because it's very warm in this game and the wind is blowing out. But he is in play because the Angels aren't very good and he's not expensive at 7.3K. The other side, Griffin Canning. Boy, oh boy, how do we get away from the Dodgers tonight? They're going to be uber chalk, and for good reason. As I said, hot, wind blowing out, and Canning is a gas can. 208 ISO giving up to lefties, not striking anybody out. 10% walk rate against lefties. I'm assuming he's giving up a hard hit rate. Yep, 45 and 50%. He's just an equal opportunity sad sack. So starting with Ohtani and Freeman on the left side, Muncy. I mean, everybody looks good here. Mookie Betts, just a full Dodgers stack. It's going to be hard to not play the Dodgers. So I have no issue with firing up a full Dodger stack and then trying to get different, in another way. Just because, far and away, they are the best offense on the board. However, if you want to get instant leverage, you can get a much cheaper Halo stack and you can fade the Dodgers, and perhaps that's something. But given the park situation and the matchups here, I don't know if the Halos are going to be completely overlooked. So I wouldn't be shocked if the whole game is chalky. It's a fairly reasonably sized slate, though, so who knows? All right, next up, we got the Padres hosting the Tigers. Kyler Montero is going up against the Padres. They got Fernando Tatis back. They don't strike out below 19% K rate. 172 collective ISO. Not a great park for hitting. It's pretty low on the park factor grade. Yeah, 28th. It's not great, but it's a pretty good matchup. Montero does give up quite a bit of contact and really doesn't strike anybody out. So Padres look pretty good. I think the park probably keeps my ownership low, but the matchup and the numbers across the board look pretty darn good for them, no doubt about it. Tigers on the other side take on Yu Darvish. I feel like this is his first game back in a while. Let me just double check. Yeah, he's just coming off the injury list, so he's probably going to be limited. Hasn't been very good at home across 8 games, only averaging 13 fantasy points per game. Hasn't pitched since May, so we cannot play Yu Darvish. And I don't really want to pick on him in this park, so it's Padres or bust for me. Probably the best pitcher tonight is going to be George Kirby taking on the Oakland Athletics in Oakland. Obviously, this is a park that is kind to pitchers. The Athletics park is 26 in park factor, so Oakland is a dangerous offense with power, but they also strike out a lot. 28.5% K rate. We see the 161 ISO, so it's something to be concerned about, but most of Kirby's struggles come from the left side. Oakland does have some lefties, but their best power hitters come from the right side. So as long as he can kind of navigate around that, Kirby looks absolutely awesome at 9K flat. I don't really care if he's chalky. Kirby and the Dodgers, if you start your build that way, you're going to stretch yourself a little bit thin as far as salary goes. But I'll get to a guy in a little bit that I think can help that. And obviously, I mentioned Stroman as just a decent, cheap SP2 as well. All right, moving on here. Last game of the night, we got the Diamondbacks and I didn't really talk about the Mariners today. My bad. JP Sears takes on the Mariners. JP Sears 7.7K. I think he's viable. Obviously, it's a pitcher-friendly park. Last game against the only time he faced the Mariners this year, 21.3 fantasy points. He can certainly be gotten to 187 ISO given up against righties. Not really striking righties out. Hard hit rate is 51.6% against righties. So if you take away the park, you look at Seattle's power, 187 ISO. Seattle actually looks decent. Given the park factor and Seattle's strikeout rate on the year, it's gotten better, but still it's almost at 23%. I think you could play Sears at that price, but I would definitely favor the Seattle side. Okay, now we get to the last game of the night. Diamondbacks at San Francisco against the Giants. We got Zach Gallen. He's not been very good. He's a great real life pitcher. He just has not been good. So getting him at 8.4K is definitely interesting. The only problem is he has one game over 10 fantasy points in his last 5. And he's going to be chalky, coming in at 21% ownership. Just been really inconsistent. And the Giants do have a little bit of power at 175. Obviously, this park kind of negates that. And they do strike out at almost a 28% clip. So Gallen is in play, but at his price point and looking at the other options that we've gone over, that's a fade for me. And maybe I say fade. I'd say I'd just be extremely underweight. And I don't know if I necessarily want to target him with Giants, but that is something you absolutely can do. The Giants do have power, and they have a lot of good lefties, and he does give up a 174 ISO to lefties. So just bank on him not being that dude in this game. He hasn't been that dude, very often recently, so it's not that crazy. Let me get a drink of water real quick. All right, last pitcher here, Hayden Birdsong. I mean, for the name alone, fire him up, right? So he looks good. He's walking lefties at a crazy 16% clip, walking righties at 10%. So obviously, on walks alone, Arizona looks pretty appealing. It's not a great park, but Arizona's got a lot of power, 187 ISO. They don't strike out that much at 20%. However, he does strike people out. So almost a 30% K rate against lefties, 25 against righties. I think because he's 6K flat, he's at home in a pitcher park, we absolutely can entertain Birdsong. If you want to get Dodger stacks in there, Birdsong is a pretty good way to do it. It will be interesting to see what his ownership looks like. Right now it's coming in at like 10%. Wouldn't be shocked if it's actually lower than that, but the price obviously puts him in play for sure. But like I said, Arizona stacks, I mean, I can't hate on it. From the right side, the power is crazy. 268 ISO he's giving up, and obviously he's walking everybody on the left side. All right, so for the most part, if you ideally you get to that Dodgers game, Dodgers are going to be pretty owned, but they're the best stack by far on this slate, and hopefully you can glean something from the rest of the games I broke down. As far as pitching goes, love George Kirby, love Imanaga, and then Birdsong is a pretty good punt at 6K flat. All right, that's going to do it for me. Hopefully this helps you out. If it does, give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Be sure to also check out the Thursday Night Football kickoff game showdown breakdown that is on the channel, and look out for our full week 1 slate preview. Thanks for watching and good luck.